Hi, this is Dave of JavaCodeJunkie.com, and welcome back to another tutorial on JavaFX. In this video, you will learn how to create and use the TitledPane control. I plan to cover the following topics: how to create a new titled pane, adding content to the titled pane, setting the title of the titled pane, how to expand and collapse the titled pane, how to disable collapsing for the titled pane, and how to set animation for a titled pane. So let's get started. Step number 1, how to create a new titled pane. Titled pane equals new titled pane. Well, the titled pane has two constructors. One, the default constructor that does not take any parameters. We can set all of the parameters after the fact. And the second one is a titled pane that contains two parameters. The first is a string, which is a title for the titled pane, and a node containing the content. It can be any class that descends from the node class. Now that means that it can be any control, or it can be one of the pane classes, such as the border pane, or the root pane, or the anchor pane, or the flow pane, or the hbox, or the vbox, that contain other node objects. So I'm going to use the default no argument constructor, and that's how you create a titled pane. Now, since our root pane in this case is a border pane, what I'm going to do is add the titled pane to the left area of the border pane. Let's run it at this point, and you should see a titled pane without a title. Basically looks a lot like a button. We can click on it, but since there is no content in the content area of the titled pane, we can't really see any expansion either at this point. So step number 2 is to add some content to the titled pane. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to create a grid pane with some components in it, some labels and some text areas. And I'm going to add that grid pane to the titled pane. So here's the method that I created. It returns a grid pane object, and it's called create grid pane. We create a new grid pane, set some padding and the horizontal and vertical gap between the rows and the columns in the grid pane, and we'll add in some labels and some text fields to represent an address. So a street name, number, city, province, and postal code. And we're going to return that grid pane object. So here I'm going to say grid pane equals create grid pane. So I have that grid pane object. Now I can add that to the content area of the titled pane. So titled pane dot set content. The node is our grid pane. At this point, I should be able to run, and you will see the titled pane with a grid pane contained in the content area. So there we have it, the street number, name, city, province, and postal code within the titled pane. Now the titled pane is currently expanded. If I click on the little triangle up in the top left-hand corner, it should now collapse. And it does. And you'll see that the collapsing is animated in that it doesn't happen instantaneously, but we have a kind of a sliding motion from bottom to top. And then when you expand, it has the same reverse sliding motion from top to bottom to open up the titled pane. But you'll see as well that there is no title in the titled pane, as we have not set that at this point. On to step number 3, setting the title for the titled pane. So we use our titled pane object dot set text, and I'll just give that a descriptive text as to what is in the titled pane. I'm going to call it address. Run it again, and you'll now see the word address in the title bar on the title pane itself. The title pane is an ideal control for a group of other controls that probably don't always necessarily have to be visible on the screen. So they can be in the collapsed state and only opened when and if they're needed. And it kind of gives you the illusion, if you will, of more screen real estate, because you have more screen that you can add other controls, and yet at the same time when you need it, the entire address or whatever you have in your title pane can be available. On to step number 4, how to expand and collapse a title pane. So we run at this point. The default state of the title pane is to be expanded. The contents of the title pane are visible. Now we can set the initial state of the title pane so that the title pane is collapsed. And to do that, we simply set expanded to false. Run it, and now the title pane should be collapsed by default. Still expandable by clicking on the triangle so we can see the content of the pane that's within the grid pane, and still collapsible. But initially, we've programmatically set it to be collapsed. Now, we can also set it back to expanded true and disable collapsing. And to do that, we set collapsible to false. So that the title pane is expanded and cannot be collapsed. So essentially, we've removed the triangle and the ability to collapse the title pane. So let's run, and you'll see the difference in how that looks. There is no triangle, no control there to allow us to collapse and expand. So what we have is simply a title pane that surrounds the content that we have in the grid pane. Set collapsible back to true. And what I'm going to show you next is the animation. Now, if you remember back to earlier in this tutorial when we looked at the initial animation, it's a smooth drop down of the content area from top to bottom when we expand, and then from bottom to top when we collapse. So let's take a look at that. So you'll see that it slides from bottom to top when we collapse and top to bottom when we expand. So that's the animated state. So I'm going to turn off animation, and you'll see the difference when we run it in just a moment. So title pane dot set animated false. So now the title pane will still be expandable and collapsible, but when we expand and collapse, the expansion and collapsing will not be animated. So collapsing right now, the content area will simply immediately disappear and reappear when we expand. So in this video tutorial, we successfully implemented a JavaFX titled pane. If you enjoyed this tutorial, click the thumbs up button to like the video. Also, please subscribe to the channel to view more JavaFX videos. Thanks for hanging out with me again today, and until next time, stay safe and keep on coding.